Hi, this is our Week 2 lecture. This is Dr. Rebecca Wood, and this week we will be discussing such things as religion, human nature, and documentation, and thinking about how these things might fit together as we go forward into the next couple of weeks. What's happening? This is arguably the most important question to ask when reading or otherwise experiencing literary works, such as watching a film or a play. For example, what is the point, theme, thesis? What are they talking about? What is the author talking about in A White Heron? Is it possibly that the cow is pretty smart? She can hide behind the bushes and be very elusive. Is it that little girls like birds, which seems pretty straightforward? Or is the story possibly some kind of theme like nature versus human nature or something else, maybe? What could possibly be the point, theme, or thesis of young Goodman Brown? It is quite the long story, and you may have to read it more than once to figure out what's going on. I've also posted a recording that may be helpful if you listen to the story that way. But the point, theme, or thesis could be something like sensible Christian people should stay home in the evenings. Hanging around in the woods with mysterious old men can be dangerous. Or something like good versus evil, which is our true human nature. So what's going on in that story? And who's who? Who are the characters? In A White Heron, there's the heron. There's Sylvia. What does her name mean? Maybe look that up and see if that name might have something to do with the setting of the story or the entire story. Grandma gets a name, but it's Mrs. Tilly, so we don't even know for sure what Sylvia's last name is. And then the sportsman, ornithologist, young man with a gun. We don't get to see his name either, I don't believe. If you do see his name, let me know. And Mistress Mooley. So the cow, is she important or not? But she does have a whole name. And then we have young Goodman Brown. And that really is basically like young Mr. Brown, Goodman being a title rather than his first name. And so if you read the story, you notice that the people in the story are basically Puritans. They're of a Christian faith that is very strict, and then he's out at night doing things that maybe he shouldn't be doing. And so what's going on in that story, and is he really a good man even though his name is young Goodman Brown? And then Faith Brown, his wife, who is wearing pink ribbons. And are those ribbons important, and why could they be important? And then we have the traveler with his staff carved with the image of a snake, and sometimes that carving seems to be alive. And then we have Goody Cloyce, again a title, Goody, for a woman, like good woman, and that's the old woman who taught Goodman Brown his catechism. And if you're Catholic, you know what that means. If not, you may have to look that up. And so what happens in this story? Sylvia brings the cow home later than usual. So if that was the case, that this was similar in some way to the story of young Goodman Brown, does the time of day that it starts have anything to do with anything else? The young stranger asks if he can stay the night. Now, if this were an Edgar Allan Poe story, we would all want to say no. And then Sylvia's grandmother, Mrs. Tilly, welcomes the man into their home. And he tells them that he loves birds, so much that he shoots and stuffs them for his collection. And he offers Mrs. Tilly and Sylvia $10 to show him where the white heron lives. This was a great deal of money in 1886. Think more on the lines of $1,000 or more rather than $10. And then Sylvia climbs a huge pine tree and sees where the bird nests. And I'm not going to be a total spoiler here, but why does the story end the way it does? And that's the kind of thing I would like to hear about on the discussion board. All right, what happens in our other story this week? Young Mr. Brown bids his wife of 3 months goodbye as he sets off into the woods. She asks him to stay, and he tells her that she should say her prayers and go to bed early. So that leaves an interesting little conflict at the very beginning of the story. And Goodman Brown secretly admits to himself that he has set off on this journey for a present evil purpose. And so you'll see a direct quote here with quote marks, and then I have a lovely citation here, an MLA citation as an example, and also because I wanted to use a direct quote here. And then he thinks about how he could possibly meet the devil himself. And right after he thinks about that, he sees an older man with a staff which bore the likeness of a great black snake. Another citation because I have another direct quote from the story. So we have to think about, well, who is this man? And there's all kinds of references to who or what he might be. And then the two of them journey further into the woods, coming across Goody Cloyce, who is walking on the road too, or the path. What happens next? Why does that happen? And then as you finish reading the story, think about whether the story seems to be a dream or was it real, and what is the point, or does it have maybe more than one point? Symbolism. There are symbols in both stories, and you can dig pretty deep and find a bunch of different symbols probably if you try, maybe even some that weren't intentional. Birds. Think about what birds often mean in literature or when we're out and looking at birds. What are they doing? Ancient pines and tree stumps. Trees that are older than we are, or trees that are no longer alive. Serpents. The classic biblical comparison comes to mind, the symbolism of what the serpent is, if you have read the Bible. Goody Cloyce's stolen broomstick. What does a broomstick mean in our cultural memory? Communion. They have a communion in this story, but it's not quite like we would normally think of a communion. And then Faith and her pink ribbons again. What are they symbols of? And are the names important in that story as well as in our first story? And then we're going to shift and talk about the academic writing process just a little bit. And it includes careful documentation of research material. The research material includes any stories, books, or movies that you refer to in your papers this term or any other term. And the writing process, which we've probably all heard of, maybe to the point where we are tired of hearing about it, but it's good to review it from time to time because it works. And so Chapter 3 of Reading and Writing About Literature has a fantastic review of the writing process, which includes some of the main points here: pre-writing, constructing a thesis, which is your main point. You need to have a main point for your paper, and all of your paper should support that main point. And then organizing your paper to make it easy for the audience to read and to understand. You don't want your audience to say, well, what was all that about, once they have finished reading your paper. And then drafting your paper. The first draft can be really crummy, and then you make it better. And then revising and editing your paper. And there are some really great revision checklists in this chapter. Also, I thought I would talk about how I might write your paper 1 if I were writing it. In fact, I've kind of done this with this work before in the past, which is why I chose this example. So many times people will say, oh, the book was so much better than the film version of any book and movie pair. And so I chose Forrest Gump because those two works are actually entirely different than what we might assume happens when you make a book into a movie. So the book version of Forrest Gump was written by Winston Groom and published in 1986. The lead character is unattractive in just about every way and unpleasant in the extreme. He is just not a nice man, and he's just really quite dreadful. His adventures are strange, more strange than in the movie, and Forrest is an entirely unlikable character, and so are the secondary characters. There's also an orangutan in the book, which I don't think improves it in any way. You might differ with me. And I believe that this is one of the few books that is not better than the film based on the book. I really felt that I had wasted my time reading it, except that I read it for an assignment for a class, so I kind of got stuck with it. I do not recommend the book. However, the film version of Forrest Gump was directed by Robert Zemeckis and released in 1994, and it won 6 Academy Awards. I believe it deserved every one. There's some people that will argue about that, about 1994's winners, but I will not get into that with you now. The lead character is charming and lovable, well played by Tom Hanks. Secondary characters are memorable and some of the interactions are heartbreaking, such as Bubba and the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company. And then there's his love interest, Jenny, and again Jenny. And the adventures take the audience from the 1950s to the 1990s with some bit parts featuring such characters as Elvis Presley and Lyndon Baines Johnson. And every time I watch it, it makes me cry in a good way. And this is an example of a works cited, and I've also pasted an image here of the Purdue Owl, which is our best friend when it comes to documentation. So we have one source here, so it's works cited. If we had more than one source listed here, it would be works cited. This is MLA style. We have the author's name reversed with a comma in between, the title of the essay, article, or story, the title of our book that it's in, the anthology, the editor's name, the publisher, the fact that I have the Kindle edition of the book I put here, and then we have the year of publication and the page numbers. Now, if you have the Kindle edition, it actually does have the page numbers on the bottom of the page, and so it tells you what page this would be compared to what page it would be on the paper in the paper edition. So anyway, this is an example of a works cited listing, and then you would go to Purdue Owl and make sure your formatting is right, because I go there every time. Don't try to memorize all the formatting. It's just too much stuff clogging up your brain. Anyway, that's our week 2 lecture, and I hope you all have a wonderful week. Thank you. Bye-bye.